Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and today we're going to turn our attention to the worms living in these two tubs over here. These are what I refer to as the mixed red worms, and you can see I've even detailed the types of worms that make up the mixed red worm population: red wigglers, European night crawlers, and Indian blue worms, occupying these systems for 74 days now. This is day 74 in service, and they're due for feeding number 7 today. 11 days since the last time we checked in on them. So I'm going to slip on a glove, get these systems up on the bench, and we're going to get to checking in on them. Let's get to work. The past 6 feedings were not all coffee. The first 2 feedings were your typical kitchen scraps. So it was really on feeding number 3 was when we decided to set up the coffee only regimen, which is not a very strict regimen, by the way, because naturally, besides food, we need to come in here with bedding on a regular basis. And besides the bedding they get and the coffee, there's also the grit. But I've also got little exceptions that I allow besides the coffee if you want it to be really strict in terms of categorizing what I'm putting in here. In the food category, you would also have little allowances that I've made. Stuff like my worm chow, because in most cases when I'm feeding coffee anyway, worm chow is sort of there to accompany the the dark food with the light colored food. Kind of makes a nice combo there. I like blending it together. And I guess the other really important thing here is that since all these things that you just saw, even the coffee might be a little damp from having, been in the machine and having had coffee brewed through it. But I don't treat any of those as having any sort of juiciness, if you will. To me, it seems more like anything that's contributing moisture to the system is something that you would have a certain level of juiciness, which, nothing here has. I can see we left a nice little treat of leaves for these little guys as a surface dressing last time we were in here, which I don't have right now. I used the last of what I have down here in my worm bin feeding yesterday. I've not yet had a chance to replenish my supply of leaves, but I do have my prepared bedding, which can accompany the food that we're giving them today. And I don't even know. I guess the allowance of grit also going in, I think, is more in the category of them getting bedding, bedding, grit, moisture. None of those really seem like they register as being part of a specific diet plan. They're just generic to all worm farms needing it. Although some people would even argue that the grit is optional, not something that they necessarily need. Perhaps a sort of a perk. If it's available, it helps with their digestion process, but perhaps they can get along even without it. And I feel a little softness over here. It's like the surface is varying already here in terms of how soft it is. And I think that softness I felt over there in bin number 2 is just a big pile of worms. But we'll see. Let's excavate the feeding zone and see how things in here look. There we go. I knew that it would be very easy in today's check-in to see how they're doing on the consumption of the last feeding, because beneath it there was sort of a layer of stuff. There was this old cardboard and some of these old slow composting objects that are in here, such as this stem of a pumpkin and an old corn cob, things that I've already here we go, started bumping into here as we go across. And you can see plenty of worms hanging out down here in the feeding zone where the coffee was left for them. But I think I see, what appears to me at least, like little signs of coffee that did not yet get consumed. But I don't think I see too much of that, so it seems like we're actually coming back here in a pretty good interval to give them their next portion. I guess that is kind of nice, as long as we've got this old piece of cardboard here that used to be the feeding zone indicator. I mean, not the feeding zone indicator, I'm sorry. This thing used to be like the little partition that we had when we migrated the worms out of their old home, so we figured let's bring that partition over since it's holding together so well and utilize it. At least that's what I think it was. I could be wrong. This other large slow composting object I found there was the husk of a mango seed. Looks like we made ourselves a nice little landing pad for today's feeding in bin number 1. And when we get to these bins 1 and 2 sort of setups, they're deliberately meant to remain pretty consistent with one another. So here I sort of expect the same as what I just saw there, a little sort of copycat follow through. And I can see here we used an old coffee filter, was probably previously in the business of being one of our feeding zone indicators. And well, just debating in my mind whether I should bring in a nice new one or let one of these older ones take over as the feeding zone indicator. There are a couple that definitely look like they're holding together well enough to be reused as one. But that's not even a coffee filter. I thought I saw one that looked pretty good, but there's a big tear down the middle of it. Forget it. Let's just reuse what's out here as the existing feeding zone indicators, if there are any. Here I don't even recall seeing one in bin number 1. So I did come down here with a couple new ones. Not only do I have the coffee in that carton box over there, but I've got a couple feeding zone indicators, which we'll place out on top, following our custom. So let's start restoring these things that we encountered along the way. The corn cobs, yeah, look at that. Worms are doing a good job. I don't know why, but I've got this little soft spot in my heart, I guess, for corn cobs. Rather than wanting to crush them, I always feel like I want to, or it's not that I feel that way, but I find myself always appearing to not want to crush them and just let them go through the breakdown process without any help from me. So here's one corn cob. Oh, there should be another one in here. Yep, there we go. I do believe we started with 3 in each system, but we did indulge our curiosity on how fragile they'd gotten a few check-ins ago and crushed one. Here again, I'm not sure if I'm remembering correctly. I hope I am, but I think that's what we did. Oh, now I'm reminded. I'm looking over there and I see that we actually had some pretty intact feeding zone indicators that I set aside earlier. We'll just reuse what we already had. They're right over there. So we're in good shape from that point of view. As far as the food goes, last time the coffee went in first, some more bedding, and then the worm chow on top of that. I'm wondering if that's a good way to layer it in there. Or do I do it the way I usually do, which is to combine them? Perhaps this time we'll combine them. And then, since I've got so much more coffee here, we can even give them a little bit more. It's just a little damp. It doesn't want to dislodge from the container. So hopefully we can coerce a little more of it to come out if we tap gently on the box. But before I forget, I wanted to make sure we get some of this yummy worm chow mixed in. We can even treat them to a little bit of grit. And hopefully if we give them a little bit more coffee, it's something that they'll be able to do away with in a timely fashion. If you think about the interval between check-ins today, see, that's what I was talking about. Only 11 days. Perhaps if we were to up the amount of coffee we leave for them today, then perhaps we can even think about extending the time between check-ins here. Which is something that I've been wanting to try to get to, but for some reason I always found myself more driven by the desire to empty out the freezer of all the stuff that I've got in there set aside to be worm food. So unfortunately feedings like this don't really help with that whatsoever. Nothing from my freezer was used in this feeding today. But at least we got rid of a good bit of coffee. Probably about a week's worth of coffee, I think, just went in here. Which I'm just roughly estimating, though. I'm thinking about how many coffee filters full of coffee it took to get to that full point, and we're down here already. So we definitely used a good bit of it. Definitely a week's worth of coffee, I think we just fed over there. And you know, let's do what we did last time. I kind of like the way the worm chow was now just sprinkled right into this bedding over here, and I think it's something that they're going to appreciate. So I think right here, moisture is going to be a really key ingredient. I think I might have even started going down the road of wanting to include it after I started listing off all the different things we had for them here today, but I somehow think I might have ended up skipping over the topic of moisture. But I wanted to touch on it earlier. It's so key here, yeah, the whole juiciness topic, right? I think that's where I was trying to lead into the fact that since the foods we're giving them here, by it being kind of strictly managed, by it being their diet, isn't bringing any moisture in. It does feel to me like being super generous with moisture down in the feeding zones is a really good idea. But you know, we've not yet examined the outskirts of the system, so as generous as I've been right there with moisture down in the feeding zone, I'm thinking let's hold off on applying any more once we see how things on the outskirts look, as if they could potentially give us a sign as to whether more moisture is needed in here or not. Then we would maybe add a little bit more, but so far I'm seeing nothing that would indicate that there's any reason for concern, especially when you just dig down deep and you see a whole bunch of worms right there hanging out in this stuff. Hopefully they're going to appreciate how I'm blending in all this lovely fresh, well, not fresh, but nicely seasoned leafy matter that was sprinkled out here on top. Gosh, I got to run outside and reload my box, bring in some more leafy matter, because it would be so nice if we could have sprinkled some out on the surface today so that it could be sitting out here and priming for the next check-in where we'd be able to blend it in once again. Well, you know, I do have a special supply of leaves, which I typically don't use in the generic fashion as I do with just the stuff that I keep in that brown box. You guys usually see me waving around when I want to add leaves. I pull out this brown box, and I do crush this stuff down as best as I can as I'm handling it to bring it over from the bag that I keep it in outside over into the box. I'm crushing it down so there's no large chunks really. The stuff's pretty dry at this point, so it fragments quite easily. So I do break it up to a certain point, but then there's that next layer that I use when I'm mixing my prepared bedding. It too includes leafy matter, but only the stuff that went through my screen. So the leafy material that I'm referring to, you wouldn't recognize this as being something that I generally use down here as one of my worm farm staple tools, if you will. But I figured, what the heck, we weren't going to use much of it, and I do have a couple jugs just like this full of this stuff, so I figured why not. Let's splurge on some super fine, lovely filtered size at this point leafy matter for these little guys. Tiny fragment leafy matter for them. I guess once in a while it would be interesting just to take a closer look at how this double thickness sugar bag is coming along. So I'd like to think that they're, the wormies I mean, I'd like to think that they're nibbling on that once in a while as they come in for a little cruise out on the surface, which I think worms just generally do out of habit. I think it's in their nature to be out on the surface, these composting type worms looking for decomposing organic matter. So we'll see. So that's it for the check-in, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. It's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.